I'm going to teach you how to make a fly casting loop and how to change its shape. A loop is the shape of the fly line in the air. Let's get started.
Here's the shape of a loop on the ground. Here's the rod. This is the bottom leg of fly line, also called the rod leg. This is the top leg of fly line, also called the fly leg. The front of the loop is called the apex or the nose. Let me show you how a loop is formed. As the rod tip moves to the casting stroke, the rod tip pulls the fly line. When the rod stops at the end of the casting stroke, the fly line overtakes the rod tip and forms the loop. The rod tip path dictates the shape of the loop. There are three basic loop shapes: narrow, wide, and tailing. I'm going to demonstrate and explain each of those for you. This is a narrow loop. Narrow loops have a straight top leg and are formed by moving the rod tip in a straight line path. The distance between the top leg and the bottom leg is no greater than 4 feet. These are efficient loops because they can cut through the air well, so they're often used for casting for distance and for accuracy. Let me show you what narrow loops look like. This is a wide loop. Wide loops have a convex or domed top leg and are formed by moving the rod tip in a convex or domed path. The distance between the top and the bottom leg exceeds 4 feet. The purpose of a wide loop is that it's often used when casting multiple flies or a large fly, and it helps prevent them from hitting the rod. These are wide loops. I can change the size of my loop by changing the size of my casting arc and the rod tip path. To cast a narrow loop, I use a narrow casting arc and a straight line path of the rod tip. To widen the loop, I widen the casting arc and move the rod tip in a convex or domed path. This is a tailing loop. Tailing loops have a concave top leg, which dips down and crosses the bottom leg, and is caused by the rod tip moving in a concave tip path. This is not an efficient loop, as it can cause the line to hit the rod and tie knots in your leader. Now I'm going to cast tailing loops on the forward casts only. Let's go over some important points. Remember that the rod tip path dictates the shape of the loop, and the top leg of fly line shows the path that the rod tip took to make that loop. If your rod moves in a convex or domed path, your loops are going to be wider. If your rod tip moves in a straight line path, your loops are going to be narrower. If your rod tip moves in a concave path, you will be casting a tailing loop. Learn to watch the top leg of fly line and make adjustments with the rod tip path to change the size of your loops. To cast narrow loops, the narrow casting arc needs to match the bend in the rod to allow the rod tip to move in a straight line path. A short cast creates a small bend in the rod, so a narrow casting arc will allow the rod tip to move in a straight line path. A longer cast with more line out will put a deeper bend in the rod, so you will need to widen the casting arc to allow the rod tip to move in a straight line path. Remember, short line, narrow casting arc, longer line, wider casting arc. I hope this helps you in understanding how you can change the shape of your loops.